All right, so this is part two of Passover Plot, the sources and growth of the legend. 1. Messianism and the development of Christianity. With the New Testament in our hands, it may be surprising to say that we know comparatively little about the beginnings of Christianity. It does not register with most Christians that our information is scanty because they are primarily concerned with the New Testament as a revelation of what is necessary for salvation and assume that it incorporates everything of consequence. Yet it is easy enough to see how little we are told. Although the public life of Jesus was a brief one, it must have been filled with incidents which have not been reported. The Gospel of John says as much, and if the events of a year or two are represented by sketchily in the Gospels, how much worse is it with the early history of the immediate followers of Jesus occupying the 30 years from AD 36 to 66? If we deduct from the Acts of the Apostles the space devoted to constructed speeches and add what can be gleaned from the letters of Paul, we have even less material regarding developments in Palestine during these 3 vital decades than is afforded about Jesus by the shortest of the Gospels. The single New Testament writer who concerns himself with the experiences of the Jewish believers in Jesus, the Nazarenes, furnishes us with little more than an idealized preference to the career of Paul and the evangelization. What is that word? Evangelicalization of the Gentiles. It is evident that Jacob, James, the brother of Jesus, was a figure of outstanding significance, but we learn hardly anything about him from the New Testament and have to turn elsewhere for further enlightenment. This is a very serious matter for the student of Christian origins, since to a large extent the truth about Jesus is not certified to us by any documents coming directly from those Judean and Galilean communities which flourished in the formative period of the Nazarene Church. From that period, there is not extant a single scrap of a Hebrew or Aramaic text which speaks of Jesus or tells us about the beliefs and experiences of his Jewish followers. We have nothing in primitive Christian material corresponding to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Consequently, to obtain that knowledge, we have not only a subject the New Testament records to the most drastic analysis, we have to study Jewish history and traditions, the writings of the church fathers and early ecclesiastical historians, and various relics of lost books, which through one or another ancient authority have been preserved. By far the most consequential factor which has deprived us of access to the inside story of Jesus and his early Jewish adherents is the Jewish struggle with Rome, particularly the first revolt, which came to boiling point in AD 66, but also the second revolt, which broke out in AD 132. Jewish resistance to the domination of heathen Rome had been in evidence long before the public ministry of Jesus, and through the bad government, the oppressive measures of the Roman procurators after the untimely death of the Jewish king Agrippa I in AD 44, it became so intensified that the war was inevitable. In this time and atmosphere, Christian beginnings are set. No account of them is of great worth, which does not recognize the effect of the situation on the minds of loyal Jews who adhered to Jesus as their Messiah. It was agreed by the pious in Israel that Rome was the arch enemy of God and his people. It was identified with the fourth kingdom, the worst of the aggressors of the prophecy of Daniel 7. Only the advent of the Messiah could destroy its power. As one of the later apocalyptic writers declares, a fourth kingdom will arise whose power will be harsh and evil far beyond those which were before it, and it will hold fast the times and will exalt itself more than the cedars of Lebanon. And it will come to pass when the times of the consummation that he should fall as approached, then the principate of my Messiah will be revealed. And when it is revealed, it will root out the multitude of his host. The messianic conviction beyond the revolt is stressed by the Jewish historian Josephus, writing under the patronage of the Rome victors. What more than all else incited them, the Jews, to the war was an ambiguous oracle, likewise found in their sacred scriptures, to the effect that at that time one from their country would become ruler of the world. This they understood to mean someone of their own race, and many of their own wise men went astray in their interpretation of it. The oracle, however, in reality signified the sovereignty of Vespasian, who was proclaimed emperor on Jewish soil. With messianic fervor inspiring it, the struggle with the far superior Roman forces was a terrible one, in which terrorism, fanaticism, and burning patriotism all played a part. The tragic climax was reached with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. As the writer has stated in an earlier work, the loss of life in the war was appalling. Josephus estimated that 1,100,000 perished in the siege of Jerusalem alone. Before this, many thousands had died or become killed in Jerusalem and in other parts of the country. The total of captives taken throughout the war numbered only 97,000. Of those who survived the siege, the combatants, the aged and feeble, were killed. 11,000 prisoners died of starvation before their fate could be determined, and the tale of death was to continue to mount with those sent to the mines or dispatched to the various provinces to be killed by the theaters by sword or torn limb from limb by wild beasts. The casualties at Jerusalem were so heavy because the population of the city was swollen with refugees who had sought safety there, and with pilgrims come to worship in the temple who were caught by the Roman encirclement. The followers of Jesus, the Nazarenes, had their headquarters at Jerusalem. There, James, the brother of Jesus, had presided over their affairs until his judicial murder, circa AD 62, reported by Josephus and others. When the war threatened the capital, the Nazarene community, in obedience to a revelation as tradition declares, abandoned the city and fled across the Jordan. We do not know how far this story is correct, but it appears that some of the leaders escaped. In any case, they were only a fraction of the Nazarenes of Palestine, who were numerous in other parts of the country, and we may believe that not a few took refuge in Jerusalem and perished there. Their fate would probably have been the same if they stayed in their own homes, as we can see from what Josephus reports regarding places they inhabited, such as Caesarea, Lydia, and Joppa, mentioned in the Acts, and, of course, Galilee down to the lakeside. At the beginning of the revolt, the Gentiles of Caesarea massacred the Jews who resided in their city. Within 1 hour, more than 20,000 were slaughtered, and Caesarea was completely emptied of Jews, for the fugitives were arrested by order of Florus and conducted in chains to the dockyards. Reaching Lydia, Gallus found the town deserted because the inhabitants had gone to Jerusalem, but 50 persons discovered were killed and the town burnt. Galilee, where Jesus had lived and taught, and which was the home of the Jewish resistant movement, suffered particularly. The Romans never ceased, night or day, to devastate the plains and to pillage the property of the country folk, invariably killing all capable of bearing arms and reducing the inefficient to servitude. Galilee, from end to end, became a scene of fire and blood. From no misery, no calamity was it exempt. Later in the war, there was heavy slaughter along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. One could see the whole lake red with blood and covered with corpses, for not a man escaped. During the following days, the district reeked with a dreadful stench and presented a spectacle equally horrible. The beaches were strewn with wrecks and swollen carcasses. In these circumstances, we may fairly hold that a high percentage of the Nazarenes of Palestine perished in the war. Mortality among the elderly and infirm was specially heavy. So if Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and therefore before AD 37, very few who had seen or heard him can have been alive 40 years later. The war created a gap only tenuously bridgeable in early Christian history. As Dr. Brandon has expressed it, Christianity went into a tunnel, and when it emerged again a decade or more later, much has changed. There is something further to be said about the survivors of the war. Early rabbinical literature reveals an inevitable consequence of the conflict and of the troubled period preceding it, which has to be taken fully into account. Many, especially of the older generation, were gravely impaired in health and memory. People whose testimony was of importance about past events and practices made contradictory statements, got dates mixed, and persons and events confused. It was very natural, but most unfortunate. The manner in which the Sanhedrin had functioned in services of the temple had been conducted had partly to be constructed of idealized lines, which can be employed by the historian only with considerable caution, a caution which some scholarly writers on the life of Jesus have failed to exercise. It is probable that some of the problems in the Gospels are attributable to the same causes, which make it most unwise to emphasize the value of oral tradition. In the study of the Gospels, all written after the war, it is customary to allow for the attitudes and intentions of the authors and for their editorial work in the employment and arrangement of their source available to them. But it should also be expected that there would be different versions of the same story, comparable sayings linked with different times and events, on the ground that post-war testimony could not fail to be governed by uncertainties of memory. For the same reason, quite apart from changes in the narrative or in the words of Jesus made deliberately in view of altered conditions, we should expect passages in the Gospels to be colored by aspects of Jewish affairs later than the time of Jesus and affecting the records by unintentional anachronism. We shall be considering the composition of the Gospels in the later chapters, when it will be of consequence to ascertain as far as possible how much about Jesus and in what form had gone out of Palestine before the war, and what additional material from Nazarene circles became available to Christians subsequently. What we have clarified so far is that the Jewish revolt had a messianic impetus, and that the effects of the war were profound for nascent Christianity, heavily diminishing what could be known about Jesus, depriving the church, now become predominantly Gentile, of authoritative guidance in matters of faith, and opening the door for the increasing intrusion of alien beliefs. But the pregnant years before the war are of the greatest import, since if they were characterized by strong Jewish messianism, it is certified to us that the beginnings of Christianity were part and parcel of it. The New Testament leaves us in no doubt that the early followers of Jesus were Jews, and that they adhered to him from the conviction that he was the expected Messiah. As late as John's Gospel, this is clearly stated, and when those who had nearest to Jesus established a community in Jerusalem, it was as the Messiah, the son of David, that Jesus was proclaimed. This was a sensational message to be carried far and wide. In the highly explosive circumstances in Palestine at the time, with the fervency of popular longing for the coming of the Messiah, no other message could have produced such eager response, excited in bitter controversy and governmental hostility. The opposition did not come from the Jewish masses, but from those in the seat of authority responsible to Rome. In Palestine, Christianity as a new religion did not exist. The Nazarenes were zealous for the law of Moses. Quite soon, the message was carried beyond Palestine and reached Greek-speaking people on the fringe of Judaism. Those who accepted it at Antioch in Syria were dubbed Christians. The name derives from Christos, Christ, the Greek translation of the Hebrew title Messiah, meaning the anointed one. We may not evade or seek to modify this basic fact that the terms Christ and Christian testify that the church was founded on messianic convictions, on belief that Jesus was the Messiah. At the time that Christianity got going in other lands and began to attract non-Jews fresh from the polytheism messianic agitation was rife in the Roman Empire. Jewish zealots from Palestine, acting as apostles, envoys, were seeking to enlist support of their anti-Roman activities among the Jews of the diaspora. The circumstances were repeated before the Second Jewish Revolt in the reign of Hadrian. These emissaries did not get much response, however, from the cities of the West, because the Jews there were very sensible of the privileges they enjoyed under Roman rule and had no desire to see them withdrawn, leaving them at the mercy of hostile Greeks. if it should be credited that they were parodies to a treasonable conspiracy. And these sentences are long. The Roman authorities were well aware of what was going on, and they were particularly concerned about zealot propaganda in key cities where there was a large Jewish population, such as Alexandria and Rome itself. The Emperor Claudius, AD 41 to 54, actually wrote to the Jews of Alexandria, warning them not to entertain itinerant Jews from the province of Syria, of which Judea was a part, if they did not wish to be treated as abettors of a pest which threatens the whole world, i.e., the Roman Empire. He ordered the expulsion of foreign Jews from Rome who were continually making disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, i.e., engaging in messianic agitation. Ooh. The late Acts of the Apostles, a product of the reign of the more tolerant Emperor Trajan, in the apologetic effort to placate the Romans, does not altogether conceal the truth, but does try to disguise it in claiming that the Christian message was misrepresented by its Jewish traducers. In the light of the actual conditions, we can see, however, that the Jews in the Greek cities attacked Paul and his colleagues in their missionary journeys because they believed them to be zealot agitators, since they were proclaiming the Messiah, and in self-protection took against them. Okay. What is that one? Hold on. I took a break. At Thessalonica. Thessalonica. The local Jews informed the magistrates that these subverters of the empire have now reached here, and they are all actively opposed to the imperial decrees, saying there is another emperor, one Jesus. Paul was eventually indicated at Caesarea before the Roman governor Felix as a plague carrier, a fomenter or revolt among all the Jews of the empire, a ringleader of the Nazarene party. One of the planks in Paul's platform had been Anastasis Christo, the resurrection of Christ, which could equally be understood as messianic uprising. It was known that he had been establishing messianic groups in many places, which might easily become, if indeed some of them were not, cells of the conspiracy, and also that he had been collecting funds to take to Jerusalem for the Nazarenes of Judea, which could be thought to be for the purchase of weapons. The Christian message obtained the most recruits among the slaves and underprivileged. Many of them, as we find in Paul's letters, were not only of low morality, but factious, restless, and fascious? I can't say that word, and I hate stopping on words like that. Factious, restless, and disaffected. Not a few must have been antagonistic to the Roman regime and only too willing to take part in subversive activities. Otherwise, it would hardly have been needed to impress upon them to behave peacefully and correctly, pay the Roman posts, and be submissive, honor and pray for their emperor and his representatives, the emperor. The Romans were not fools and must have had some justification for regarding Christianity as a dangerous and hostile superstition. It is significant that after the suppression of the first Jewish revolt, the Romans did not outlaw Judaism, though they tried to make it certain that non-Jews professing this faith were genuine converts, but they did not outlaw Christianity. They had long been familiar with the Jewish religion and knew that militant messianism was not common to all Jews. Christianity, on the other hand, stemming from a Jewish sect, was wholly messianic and committed to propaganda on behalf of an asserted king and world ruler called Jesus. It could and did produce a violent anti-Roman document in the book of Revelation. If Christians who were not Jews refused to burn incense before Caesar's image, it was to be put down not to religious scruples, but to treasonable opinions. Strange as it may appear to those who think of the deity of Jesus in a religious sense, it was the messianic character of Christianity which contributed directly to his deification among believers from the Gentiles. Messianism represented the conviction that the existing world order would presently be overthrown. The emperor ruled by Caesar and his legions would pass away, and in its place there would be the kingdom of God governed by the Messiah and his people. Christianity identified the Messiah with Jesus. There was another king, another emperor to whom allegiance was transferred. The message about Jesus found a lodging among peoples who believed in the commerce of gods with mortals and were accustomed to the deification of rulers and other outstanding personalities. The Acts testifies to this when a cripple was cured at Lystra during the mission of Paul and Barnabas. The populace cried, "The gods are come down to us in the likeness of men," and hailed Barnabas as Zeus and Paul as Hermes. The Greeks of Sisera, claiming the speech of King Agrippa when he appeared in state, shouted, "It is the voice of a god, not of a man." The whole Roman Empire was at this time knit by an imperial cult which conjoined the worship of Rome and the emperor. The cult had developed in the reign of Augustus, who, for reasons of state policy, accepted deification and authorized the building of temples in which he was worshipped. He was formally decreed Son of God, Divi Filius, by the Senate. A typical inscription dated 7 BC hails him as Caesar who reigns over the seas and continents, Jupiter who holds from Jupiter, his father, the title of Liberator, Master of Europe and Asia, Star of all Greece, who lifts himself up with the glory of great Jupiter, Savior. Oh, we're getting into some Jupiter stuff. Gaius Caligula, AD 3741, became obsessed with the notion of his deity, and his sycophantic officials played up to him. Suetonius reports that Lucius Vitellius, legate of Syria, returning to Rome at the end of his term of office, adored the emperor by prostrating himself on the ground and would only appear before him with head veiled. The same authority tells how Gaius began to arrogate. Man, hold on. Please tell me. Please. Let's pause it. Let me do this. I got a lot to do today, guys. And I haven't even started. Just let me pause for today. I'll finish this. Let's start this whole cliff. Yeah. It's what happens. Gaius Caligula, AD 3741, became obsessed with the notion of his deity, and his sycophantic officials played up to him. Suetonius reports that Lucius Vitellius, legate of Syria, returning to Rome at the end of his term of office, adored the emperor by prostrating himself on the ground and would only appear before him with head veiled. The same authorities tells how Gaius became too arrogate to himself a divine. Looks like he's arrogant, but it's not. It's arrogate to himself. A divine majesty. He ordered all the images of the gods, which were famous either for their beauty or the veneration paid to them, among which was that of Zeus Olympus, to be brought from Greece, that he might take their heads off and substitute his own. Damn, this is getting good. He also instituted a temple and priests, which choice victims in honor of his divinity. In his temple stood a statue of gold, the exact image of himself. The most opulent persons in the city offered themselves as candidates for the honor of being his priests and purchased it successfully at an immense price. All right, that's it for today.